Good afternoon, everyone. May I ask for a minute of your attention, please? Thank you very much. My name is Stefano Brusoni. I'm the division chair-elect of the team division. I have the pleasure of introducing to all of you the winner of the 2018 Team Division Distinguished Scholar Award, Maryann Feldman, who will give us her distinguished lecture in a couple of minutes. I would like to give you just a little bit of background about the award. Every year, the division struggles to identify a scholar who has shaped the field in ways that have helped all of us to improve our work and impact policy and managerial practice. This year was not much of a struggle at all. It was a very easy, simple, linear discussion. Maryann works on understanding the determinants of places, how they change, how they affect innovation and economic activities has been pivotal for many of us in many different ways. To me, as a PhD student, it was a reminder of the importance of providing realistic, observable, measurable indicators to a number of processes that relate to the emergence and distribution of knowledge, a fundamental input to any kind of economic or innovative activity. What I enormously appreciated always about Maryann's work was the attention to the actual workings of the main agents that are there to innovate, to generate knowledge, corporate R&D labs and universities. And what was really amazing to me was looking at how Maryann's work made the importance of space, the physical space in which activities happen, not only a descriptive element of stuff that happens, but a fundamentally important analytical variable to actually understand, explain, and make predictions. Her work has been impactful in so many different ways and in so many different fields that it's hard to list them all. She has published extensively in management, in innovation, in economics, policy, history as well. So I would say that, first of all, before I leave the floor to Maryann, to thank Wiley for generously sponsoring this event and the lunch we're having. And on this, I would invite you all to join me in giving Maryann a very warm welcome here. Thank you.
Wonderful. It is my pleasure to be giving this lecture, and I want to just start by thanking you. Realize going through this, it's sort of like being in the job market. By the time you finish pulling this lecture together, you really know what your work is about. And I would like to thank my wonderful co-authors. It really has been, for me, very rewarding to work with a large group of people on a variety of projects, enriching my work, but not only my life. So thank you. And the organization of the talk, I'm going to give some reflections on my career. Now, usually when I do an MBA or an undergraduate class, it takes them about 3 weeks to realize that I'm actually quite funny. And I want to just alert you to that fact. And then also, so this is after lunch on a Saturday, right? And so please, enjoy this journey with me. And, I want to sort of be attuned in this talk to advice to graduate students and to people early in their career. And I'm also, in this talk, going to address the Me Too movement. And I've had a great career, and this has not been a topic of my research, but it has been my life. And so I really feel that it's important now that we talk about these issues. Now, I have to acknowledge, of course, here at Tim's, I'm preaching to the choir, right? And so this is a group where I think women do really feel accepted. But we also know that men are our best advocates. And I've had a good career, but it hasn't always been a smooth ride. And I really feel that there should be more senior women And I have, over my career, seen so many bright women drop out at various levels in progression. And it is not my intention to offend anyone, but I'm also not going to apologize. And studies have shown that when women apologize, men think they're dumb. And if I offend anyone, I hope that you will just think more deeply about what it is that I'm saying. I love this quote from Leonard Cohen. And he said, "They sentenced me to 20 years of boredom from trying to change the system from within." And right now, if we don't talk about women's issues, then when will we ever have an opportunity? I've seen several chances where we've discussed women issues and then they've gone away. And also, if at this point in my career I can't be honest about my career, then who will be able to have this discussion? And so let me just start out and, sort of think about my success. I really had early on a statistical advantage. And so it's no surprise that my career's been successful. And we think about the nature versus nurture debate. Well, I have all of the attributes that the literature associates with women's success. So I was the firstborn child. My parents were older. They were just delighted to have a kid. Didn't bother them so much that I was a girl. My father was an accountant. And also, this is really been shown that accountants have daughters that are more successful. Two reasons are given. One is that they just go with the numbers, right? They're just pragmatic and they're just looking at things and evaluating them. The second is that accountants will teach their daughters math. They will give them confidence with numbers that serves them well. So I had all of those advantages. I also went to a girls' school where men were sort of some exotic species that we only thought about when we had dances. And so, this was sort of what set up my early career. I want to talk to you about an early experience I had. I played Little League. And right now, women's sports are much more integrated with men's sports, and women's sports are much more accepted. At the time when I was growing up in the 60s, this was not necessarily the case. But my dad was the coach. So his kid got to play, and that was going to be me. And so, said just a little conversation. "Hey, Dad, I'm the shortstop. Tough position. My batting average is good. But something is up. My teammates treat me like I'm dumb, and I don't understand the game." My father said, "Well, Maryann, they treat you like you're a girl." I'm like, "Dad, why would they do that?" Right? And so, just sort of this discrepancy where I wanted to be looked at as any little league player, but somehow I was a girl. And so my dad said to me, just do your best. Let them underestimate you, and you can show them up every single time. And so this has been sort of something guiding in my life. And always I've had these moments where I think, oh, what's going on here? Oh, yeah, they're treating me like a girl. And, probably not unusual that you would treat me like a girl, because this is probably what I looked like in the 50s. So all my family photos are the wrong media. But, really, if you can imagine, I'm playing Little League, and then my mother is really kind of giving me this acculturation. So I didn't look like this when I played Little League, but I know I was color coordinated, and my accessories were tasteful. And this has been, always in my life, this tension of trying to be authentic. To be authentic as a scholar, authentic as a teacher and mentor, but also as a mother and as a partner. And society doesn't make those tensions easy for us to navigate. Another unfortunate correlate of success was that my father died when I was young. And studies have shown that people who suffer this kind of loss early on become overachievers. And it is just a fact. But I thought my father had given me really a good gift and had launched me quite well. And then also, my poor mother had been twice widowed, once during the Second World War, and then with my father's death, and she really imbued in me this sense that I needed to be prepared to support myself and my family. And full stop, that was it. This is going to be your life. So this is succinctly my philosophy, and this comes from Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. He said, "Lovers will leave you, allies will betray you. Learning is the only thing that never disappoints." And early on in my life, this is what became true, that always I could lose myself in books, in research topics, and that this would give me a sense of solace. And whenever I faced an obstacle, I would just start another research project, move to something different. So to talk about my work, I thought, you know what? I'm a learning junkie. And so these are then my confessions. And sort of, I want to explain sort of how I became so multidisciplinary. And a lot of it was going to Carnegie Mellon at a time when this was such an interdisciplinary place. My undergraduate was at Ohio State. I was a double major in economics and geography. And I was always sort of interested in places and how places changed. My dissertation was called The Geography of Innovation. And so I finished that in 1992. It was a 1994 book. And just sort of the context at the time was Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh going through this sort of deindustrialization, loss of manufacturing jobs. A lot of my colleagues, my fellow graduate students, were looking at employment change, structural change, shift share analysis in the economy, trying to understand what had happened. And I just thought, why don't we study the upside? Clearly something good is going to happen. So I was very influenced at the time. Wes Cohen, who was on my committee, would bring Dick Nelson and Sid Winter to campus, and so we were reading evolutionary theory, and I thought simply, let's focus on innovation. Let's be more optimistic. And really, my dissertation was inspired by two articles: Adam Jaffe's The Real Effects of Academic Research, and also Och and Aldrich, Innovation in Large and Small Firms. And so as I was looking for topics, this is the old days when you would go to the library, and I would read the American Economics Journal, and I thought Adam Jaffe had a great model. He was using the knowledge production function model, yet he was using patents. And, well, patents are what we have. They're not a very good indicator of inventive activity. And so, Och and Aldrich had this great data. It was a census of all of the innovations introduced to the U.S. market in 1984. And so this was an incredibly sort of rich data set, and it occurred to me I could take a knowledge production function, augment it with a few more variables, and this was a way of moving the literature forward. And Och and Aldrich had not looked at the geography, so they sent me the data on a tape, on an old magnetic tape, which I still have in my office, and students come in and they ask me if I'm a film bluff. But with this data, it was just sort of wonderful, and all of the pieces came together beautifully. But I want to say to graduate students in the room that timing is everything. And for me, this was not such an easy process, because in 1988, I had proposed a dissertation looking at geography, trying to get at innovation. And I was told by an economist on the faculty at Carnegie Mellon that geography was not interesting, that any geographic discrepancies simply reflected temporary disequilibrium. Over the long run, things would re-equilibrate. And so why would I study this? And so I left with a failed dissertation proposal. And Then, kind of a low point, my mother was ill and diagnosed with terminal cancer, knew that she was dying. And at that point, I was ready to walk away. I mean, really it was enough. And treat me like a girl, and I'm going. But my mother would make these lists as she knew she was dying, would tell me who was getting what piece of jewelry, who was getting what craft item, and on every list she would say, finish your dissertation. You will always regret it if you don't finish your dissertation. So I went back to Carnegie Mellon, and suddenly, in 1990, geography was the hot topic. And it had to just be the right place at the right time. So Krugman had given his lecture on geography and trade, and that had caused a great buzz. And Krugman said, I'm an international trade economist. My theory predicts we should be seeing this equilibrium. We're not. Something else is going on. We need to study this differently. Michael Porter came out with The Competitive Advantage of Nations, talking about innovative clusters in different places. And then to give us a theoretical grounding, Romer came out with his models of endogenous technological change. And so this was just sort of almost magic. And I was able to write my dissertation after sort of taking 8 years to come up with a topic. I finished my dissertation in 18 months, but simply because I had to, because the clock was ticking. And I had 2 children. I was enjoying the life of writing a dissertation, but had to finish, and I did. And it was really very successful, and amazingly. And so let me just mention that I now worry that we tell our students to write a 3-paper dissertation. And I'm old school. I like a manuscript dissertation, and I think it allows you to go really deep on one topic and really develop that topic well, and to then think about all of the aspects of it, things that you might cultivate. And so 9 of my most highly cited papers came from my dissertation. And I mean, like, that was really remarkable when I realized that. 6 of them were written with my dissertation advisors. And so, I was very fortunate to have worked with Richard Florida and Wes Cohen when they were assistant professors. And also Zoltan Ach and David Aldrich provided the data, and so they were around. And it was just a sort of really nice opportunity. And I also then had a literature review, which I have published, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you, almost 5 different times in various guises, where I just keep thinking, how has the literature changed, and how do we now reevaluate this? But to me, this is like a strong kind of intellectual core. I continued to do some work with David Aldrich, and David is just a really generous guy and was great fun to work with. And so we did 2, again, very highly cited papers, and started to look at take the data a little bit further. Now, my dissertation came out as a book in 1994, and it was actually, I think, Zoltan Ach who sent it to the publisher, and I was sort of mortified because it wasn't ready to be sent out to anybody, which was a lesson there. Just send it and see what happens. But I've just become I'm a fan of writing books. And I think that books allow a scholar to make a larger statement than we can make in any one individual article. And I've also had great success with edited books. And edited books can be a tremendous amount of work, but you can think of it as an intellectual dinner party, that you are convening the people that you would like to have a conversation with. And so I was very fortunate in writing with someone who was going to be my advisor before he left Carnegie Mellon, Gordon Clark, who is now at Oxford, and we wrote the Oxford Handbook of Economic Geography, which then won a public choice award. not a public choice award, but a Reader's Choice Award, so a National Book Award. And so we have just reissued that book, sort of reconvened the group and published it again in 2018. And then I also wrote a book in 2006 with Pontus, and I always slaughter his Swedish last name, Brongillerholm, and that was clustergenesis. And for me, I wasn't sure. I kept thinking that we want to study change in regions, but I felt like I was too far out. Could we bring together a group of people and then see how our topics were converging? And so, I also, during this time, I sort of faced the irony of studying agglomerations while I was really in Baltimore, kind of working alone. And so this, I think, is a frequent theme in women's lives. I was married and geographically constrained. And I made what was a tough decision, do I accept tenure at a small liberal arts college, or do I go to a non-tenured job at Johns Hopkins? And so it seemed to me, of course, you want to be at the best place that you can be, even if the position is suboptimal. And I worked at an institute for policy studies. I started there with another group of people, the entrepreneurship minor, sort of just cobbling together a full-time job as best I could. And there was a time when someone came to my office and he said, you're not on tenure track. I don't know why you work so hard. And I thought, yeah, I'm not on anybody else's tenure track, but I've got my own tenure track. And that's what I'm listening to. And so I also think that the good news is that no one gave me a list of journals to say, these are the 5 places where you could publish. And I really think that was very fortunate for me, because I could pursue my muse. And I really could, I have to say, I kind of try to see, could I publish in a history journal? What would it take? And just sort of try to diversify. A lot of my work is in geography, regional science, economic geography journals, just a variety of different places. I've published in a surgical journal, just, because this is fun, why not try it? I also, because I was then, sort of unsure, I did a fellowship at the Hadley Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society. And the Hadley has rich archives, and I was studying the geographic location of the pharmaceutical industry. So with my product innovation data, the most highly concentrated industry in 1984 was not computers in Silicon Valley. There was more innovation coming from New Jersey in pharmaceuticals. So I wanted to understand how that geographic agglomeration came into being. And so it's Philadelphia, which was the nation's capital, had strong schools of medicine, the first schools of medicine, the first schools of pharmacy, and also the Port of New York, where the Germans were importing their chemicals, and in between, an industrial geography coalesces, also known as New Jersey. And this is funny, please. And so from there, I first of all learned how to do archival research, which has served me very well. But also I felt that I really wanted to talk to people, to live people, not to be always reading historical records. And also, at this point, I realized that I was at Johns Hopkins, which was the counterfactual example of a superb research university where there were no knowledge spillovers that benefited the local economy. Baltimore in the 80s, and it's not much better now, had really not gone through any kind of an industrial transformation. And so the core motivating questions always for me involve geography and space. And so, if universities, and this was a finding from my work, university resources are not sufficient, then what other factors might be operating? And here I was really fortunate to benefit from what I think is the new kind of a knowledge spillover, and that is spillovers through co-authoring. And so I met Janet 20 years ago, and have learned so much by working with her, because I'm not a management scholar, but through Janet I learned a lot on organizational theory, transaction cost economics, and it's been just a really wonderful, fruitful relationship. Janet and I have 9 published papers that have more than 200 citations. We've done 5 book chapters, and we've also had a lot of fun, and also it's been a wonderful learning experience. And so Janet and I started just really going through the details, when we say crawling through tech transfer offices, and trying to understand how the organization of the office, whether it was a hierarchy or decentralized, how that affected outcomes. What were the cultural norms in a certain university? How did the history affect the way that the university embraced technology transfer? And then also, what was the relationship of the university to its ecosystem? And Janet and I hit on a vein of very fruitful data, which was to look at invention disclosure reports. So these are in advance of a patent, and they give us further insights into what faculty think have commercial value. And I think one of my favorite articles, always my favorite articles, whereas Maryann, get kicked around a lot. And so this one was looking at peer effects, academic entrepreneurs, and looking at organizational change at the individual level. And in more recent work with Denisa, we're using invention disclosures to look at invention teams and stars and try and disentangle, is it the star scientist or the team that they bring around themselves? And now we have, I think, to me, this is such an exciting time to be an innovation scholar, because we have new data and I think new, more nuanced questions. And so Janet and I thought that we really had to study the sources of research funding. And so with Alex Grady-Reed, we started going through administrative records. And so thousands of records for tens of years, and administrative data are scarily dirty. When you think that, this is all of this reporting that we rely on is predicated on these individual microdata, which it's sort of very humbling. And so in that project, we have tried to look at the sources of funding and how the sources of funding affect outcomes. And specifically, we've been looking at philanthropy, and philanthropy is growing in importance. Right now, American universities receive more research dollars from foundations than they do from industry. This is fundamentally changing the academic enterprise and our interaction with industry. And we've also been very interested, and Alex wrote some of her dissertation on this, on venture philanthropy. And our newest work is trying to understand how the sources of funding affect the scientist's career and their productivity. But ultimately, all of this work, I'm always going back to, how is it that places change? Have any of you been to North Carolina? Yeah, we've got my North Carolina contingent. Well, this is a place called the American Tobacco Warehouse. And this is the same perspective taken 60 years apart. And so the American Tobacco Warehouse in Durham is Bull Durham cigarettes, and it is Lucky Strike. And so the innovation, what made this huge factory and what made this area so prosperous, was the machine rolling of cigarettes. So previously, cigarettes were rolled by hand, and the Duke family had taken out a patent on machine rolling. And so they were here employing about 4,000 people. But then, tobacco fell out of favor. It was no longer manufactured in an urban area, and this space went into disuse. Now it is a high-tech incubator. It is a space where there are more people employed than there ever were at the American Tobacco Warehouse. And so we have a variety of large and small firms, incubators, accelerators, venture capitalists, and so it has sort of come into existence over this very short time. And I've been studying this recently a lot through the building of a relational database, the kind of activity one can only do post-tenure, because it has been sort of such a large activity. We call this PLACE, it's the Platform Accelerating Community Ecosystems. It's a relational database, and it's open source, and so we are sharing it with other people because it is a way to see how companies develop, the interrelationships between companies and service providers, institutions, organizations within their ecosystems, and then how entrepreneurs interact through this. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the guiding intellectual principles that I have. And so, I sort of think like just thinking about what is it that you really believe. And for me, I've always thought that geography provides a platform to organize economic activity. We think of firms and other organizations as ways that we organize and produce things, but geography functions in the same way. And then also, as I study geography, it's very much about studying the region by studying the constituent firms and organizations. And one of our early realizations was that census and political geography was inadequate because firms locate as they will along transportation routes where there is available office space. And so you can miss microgeography, the sort of microagglomerations, when you're looking at MSAs. Or our problem is that we are actually two MSAs, the Raleigh MSA, the Durham MSA, neither of whom are very significant, but you add it together and we're the 17th largest MSA right between Austin and Nashville, and that fact is missed. And so sort of just studying the firms and their location. I've also gotten sort of in my work interested in the agent of change. And I'm someone in a public policy department, but I really feel that entrepreneurs are the most appropriate agents of change. And so a variety of papers, and some going early to my years at Johns Hopkins on the entrepreneurial event revisited. What is it that creates this sort of spark where someone will go out and form a firm? And then subsequently, Janet and a graduate student, Francis and I wrote, how do you creating a cluster while building a firm, with the idea that firms interacted with their external environments and helped to create that cluster as they moved along. And then I've done a variety of papers on social capital looking at networks and trying to get at these sort of non-economic factors, which is pretty funny because I'm really trained as an economist, but trying to understand what it is, the character of innovative places. Why do people make investments, non-pecuniary investments, in certain places that seem to make the difference and allow those places to move forward? And I think the last, if I just sort of say I've been influenced by Kathy Eisenhart, is that, rather than going to the literature to look for a topic, I always sort of observe, we interview people, and then sort of step back. How has the literature looked at this, and what else might we say? I think Lauren Lanahan and I both have this distinct memory of having driven back from an interview and being seated at a stoplight, and we just hit on her dissertation topic, a eureka moment. The interview had mentioned a state-level SBIR match that was available to firms that had gotten a Phase 1 SBIR award. It was a top-off. Nothing in this in the literature at all. And so this has served Lauren very well, and Lauren is now working with Daniel Armanos and doing really great work extending this. I just learned that this variable is a good instrument too. And so, just by going deep in these topics, new ideas. I think this to me is, with research, you answer one question and 3 more arise. I also, sort of new concerns and just things that really worry me. I think that we have gone too far in our analysis of cities and urban areas. And I have to tell you that when I first started writing about the concentration of innovation in cities, people said cities are not where the action is. Really, it's edge cities. It's not the central downtowns. And that has really flipped. And I think now that we have, I'm studying what I call these distributed pockets of prosperity. And we have a project called Small Towns, Big Ideas. And so these are places that are really trying to reinvent themselves and that need new ways of doing this, because things that work in urban areas don't work very well in smaller places. And I'm not sure it serves all cities around the world equally well also. Next, I think that we have too much focus on the same technology-intensive industries. And one of the most exciting things now is that technology is pervasive. And so we're seeing even mundane manufacturing being reinvigorated. And I think that 3D printing is going to lessen locational constraints, and that we are really going to see more of a renaissance, and I believe that we need to study this. And I think also that we need to do more to discuss the policy implications of our work. So I feel for a long time we've tried to understand things, but we stop short of going the next step to really advise policy. And so that's sort of a short tour through my work. Now I'm going to change topics and talk about this sort of, the Me Too movement. And just, I don't want us to concentrate on these really horrible incidents, but I think that this is a chance when we can move forward and level the playing field. And I want to talk about something called broken window policing. Have any of you ever heard of this? This has been implemented in New York. And so the idea is that you just don't tolerate small infractions. You speak up when you see a broken window, and when the windows look good and people feel better, then they go outside. So the idea is that we can't control the most egregious things, but that we can control the small and seemingly inconsequential actions. And that disorder is really not linked to broken windows, but disorder leads to fear and withdrawal, and that fear and withdrawal then leads to more serious crimes. So I think no tolerance of microaggressions. And so I do feel that these microaggressions, when you feel like you're being treated like a girl, it is debilitating. And it causes you to withdraw. And so, what are these microaggressions? Well, it's a lot of small and subtle put-downs. And once you sort of become aware of this, you realize how pervasive they are. And I always, now I'm aware, and I take no prisoners, and will, so don't say that to my colleague, or do you realize what you just said? And most times it's not. There are always the interruptions, too, where it's just sort of interruptions of women become easier. And I've learned that if you say, excuse me, my colleague was talking, that people will then will back down. Mansplaining, right? I always wondered what that was, and then now we have a term for it. This is just making you feel like a girl. And gaslighting. And so gaslighting is more serious. Do any of you know what this is? 1944 movie with Ingmar Bergman. And in the movie, she's married a bad character who is after her money, so he slowly does things to make her feel that she's going crazy and slowly undermines her confidence. Oh, no, that was just your imagination. No, you're really making too much of that. No, that didn't happen. And, don't be difficult, right? And these are the things, I think, that are so debilitating to women. And finally, there are so many normative assertions. And here I'm going to give you an example. So this is a recent research highlight that was published in my beloved journal, Research Policy. And I have told the lead editor and the publisher that I'm going to use this example. I was doing a literature review, and I was known the author for 30 years. I think he's a fine scholar. And I found the article, and the research highlights are just featured very prominently there. And it is a study of Japanese scholars, and the highlights, 3 highlights, we compare the novelty of published papers. We find that those funded by competitive project funding are on average more novel. However, for lower status researchers, parentheses, junior, female, end parentheses, novelty is higher for non-competitive block funding. And as I saw this, I was stunned. And I want to use this, and I've talked with the author at length, and he and I have tried to come to an understanding. I'm going to be writing this as a correction to research policy because I think that lower status researchers is this kind of a microaggression, and it is offensive. And as I read it, I was just stunned. I don't know what the percentage of scholars, the scholarly community, to those that are active authors, highly cited authors, how many of the women, how many more women are reviewers, what's the reviewer to publication ratio? We don't know these things. But I don't want to know them. I want to correct this. And so it just seemed to me that this statement on its own, lower status researchers, and so this is a very normative statement. Are junior researchers lower status? Do you think junior researchers are lower status? Well, I think compared to senior researchers, they're probably lower status. They have fewer citations, their H score is lower, they make less money, okay? Less standing in the field. But when you are a junior researcher, that is a temporary state. You're going to pass out of that and become a senior researcher. But females, again, this is a normative judgment. And also, in the Japanese context, as we just learned in the news this week, that a Japanese university has been discounting the scores of female applicants to medical schools for 10 years to keep their admission rates lower. And in this study, only 5% of the academic researchers were women. So, we have these immutable characteristics. And so this is socially constructed. And I think when we say these things, when we allow these things to stand, we are really reinforcing a bad status quo. And I want to say to this community, stop studying women as if they require explanation. That's funny, really, I'm trying to be funny, And so study the barriers instead. What prevents women or any group from reaching their full potential? And then focus on solutions. And if you think it's that, we're going to put in a dummy variable for women. And let me tell you that Janet and I, in our paper on peer effects, we actually had a gender variable. And after we had accounted for precise measures of a woman's status and standing in the field, the resources that she had, her publications, there was no difference. The gender variable was not statistically significant. And we were rejected from a journal which said, everybody knows that's not true. And no, if you give women the same resources, they will perform the same. And so I think really that this is where we can work to change policy. And this is also meant to be funny, but truthful. My gender is not a choice, okay? If it was a really bad career choice for me. And, we accept now that people who are gay, people who are transgendered, they can't be changed. It is just they're who they are. Well, this is who I am, and I'm just trying to be authentic to this. Jeanette Kalivas turned me on to a book called The Scholar Denied. It came out in 2015 by a sociologist, Morris. And it deals with W.E.B. Du Bois and the birth of modern sociology. W.B. Du Bois was an African American. He studied at the University of Chicago and was very influential in what became known as the Chicago School of Sociology. In fact, some would claim that he was actually the originator of this. But his white co-authors and advisors appropriated his scholarship. And he had a sort of systematic lack of credit and attribution by the profession. And Morris goes so far as to argue that sociology, with the imposition of these normative standards on things like race and gender, is systematically and pervasively racist and sexist. And, if you think that women are lower status, well, then what happens? I think that their scholarship is treated as service or as a public good. They're not cited, and other people attempt to take credit for their work. So this is another conversation, if you will. And so I've had this happen to me several times. And, I'll meet a male scholar, and they say, "I am so happy to meet you. I think I've read everything that you've ever written." Then I say, "Thank you. That's very flattering. I thought you might be familiar with my work, but I wasn't sure because you never cite me." Right? Which always causes them to get very flustered and leave. But, the reason that we participate in this, again, this is being treated like a girl. And citations are important to us. We write because we want to be part of a conversation. And when you're not cited, you're dropped out of that conversation. You're not given the accreditation that you deserve. So I think, what we need to do is, again, I want to be more positive because things have gotten so much better. I think that, I've had a very rich career, but right now I think no tolerance of microaggression. If you're not sure when someone says something, ask them for a clarification. And then don't interrupt me, don't interrupt my colleague. And I think also it's important for us to mentor, to empower, to cite, and to listen to female researchers. And I think that we need to be better advocates for women, and I would also add minorities here. Interesting study that I read about French physicians, and right now French medical schools, French women only got the vote after the Second World War, and they are trying to sort of, through policy, create more opportunities for women. So they've done in medical schools, admitted equal amounts. Well, French women physicians are not getting the business that their male colleagues get. And it turns out that men prefer to go to men doctors and women prefer to go to men doctors, except for OBGYN. And so when I read that study, I immediately switched all of my doctors to women. And, my lawyer, my accountant, okay, let's go full in to trying to support women's careers. And this also, in another study that I read, there were more African American physicians in 1920 than there were in 1970. And it was the same thing that was operational. People could go through the pipeline, they could get the degree, but there was no demand for their services, and it became less lucrative. And I also want to say sort of the best advice I can give to my senior colleagues is please err on the side of being generous. Just make it easier for young people to have fruitful careers. And finally, advice for young scholars, because I don't want us to have this distinction, male and female, because I don't think that it's easy for men. And I don't want men to say, women are asserting themselves and therefore they're battling me. Couldn't be further from the case. We want everyone to fully participate. And so I think for young scholars, my best advice is you will get tenure. Be tenacious. You may not get tenure at your first job, but you will somewhere, and probably at a place where you will be happier. And also, you can have it all, but maybe not at the same time. And so my life, I've had, sort of periods where I've had young children and my productivity suffers. I always think that you can look at someone's CV and you can see when children were born, when there was an illness. It tells a story, and we need to be more accepting of that. And also, I think you will have good relationships, but maybe not your first relationship. And I think you have to cultivate those relationships that are good. And if relationships are bad, walk away. And then really, I think the thing that makes this career rewarding is to enjoy the love of learning and research. And again, learning is the only thing that never disappoints. Thank you. If y'all knew how nervous I was to give this talk, but thank you very much.
We do have some time for a few questions.
Thank you, Maryann, for this wonderful talk. So I would like to move to the innovation side of stuff. Although I certainly appreciate the other remarks as well. But you said there is this tendency, which I believe is true in the innovation field, to focus on high-tech areas and so on. So I would like to have your reflection on why is that the case, and what should we study in its place? You said that technology is becoming more pervasive and so on in society. That's certainly true, but maybe there are some areas more worth of studying than others.
Right. No, thank you. And I think, it is, I think, someone creates a data set. We're doing way too much work with patents, right? And that's because we know patents. Perhaps too much on biotechnology, and again, because we know it well. But I think cultivating a new topic, a new industry, a new technology. I've gotten very interested in new patent classifications. And so when there is a broad technology, for example, Cohen-Boyer created a new patent class. And so then that's something really creative and new. And so I think there are others of these that would be worth looking at. The other thing that we do a lot at the Keenan Institute is to go out to visit factories and to talk to factory managers. And it's just amazing how rich that is and how insightful. And so, sort of the technology that's being used is really profound in very mundane industries, paper, textiles. And also what that means is that the nature of jobs is changing, and this is, sort of a worthy area. And then also, there's just really, Mercedes Delgado has some really wonderful work now looking at articulated supply chains, value chains, and the way that these build out in different areas. So I think that, that is another sort of area worth studying. 3D printing right now of different parts and the regulation of 3D printing is going to be, I think, sort of opening up a lot of new areas for fruitful research. And then also net neutrality. Does anybody understand net neutrality and all of these topics? I mean, this is so critically important, right? And we're upset when, we see our data being sold. Yet, we don't really understand it. And I would love to see more people go into that area. I think right now, okay, I can go, that the trademark data is becoming available. And so I think this is going to be an incredibly rich data source that will complement what we know about patents. And then always, the data that I had, so the, sort of my dissertation data, a census of all of the innovations introduced to the U.S. economy in 1 year has never been repeated. And I think more data on product innovation, those things that actually reach the market, would be very fruitful.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just a lot of the recent developments in the discussion about innovation are going in the direction of this open innovation debate.
Oh, yes.
A lot of which is kind of digitally enabled, internet enabled. Is that going to affect the importance of geography or geographic related variables in the discussion about innovation, or not to a great extent?
I think with open innovation, again, sort of being close to tacit knowledge, these sort of interactions, right, sort of the creativity, the serendipity, I think that it will not change. And so I think we are seeing these pockets, and again, to me, pockets in smaller places. And I worry, when I go to London or New York anymore, there are great efforts, right? Roosevelt Island, and they're trying to sort of build this agglomeration there. But there's very little serendipity. Everything that, my friends must plan everything. You can't just walk into a restaurant. You must have a reservation. So the literature sort of assumes that larger and larger is always going to be bigger. We don't really consider what are the geographic limits of city size and what is the optimal city size for certain kinds of activities. To me, also, there's a movement for open innovation that is occurring within academia. So there is a feeling among, and it's driven by scientists, that they're just tired of licensing. It's just a bureaucracy. They don't want to deal with it. So the open source science movement, I think, is going to be huge and is just going to, that is really exciting as that takes place. So I don't view it as a threat at all. In fact, I think that correspondingly, as we've cared more about innovation and intellectual property protection, we've really destroyed some of the benefits that universities used to engender and made it more difficult for them to interact with their local environment.
So Maryann, thank you so much for your talk. So the picture that you showed from Durham, the difference between what American Tobacco District used to look like from what it looks like today, course, is very personal to all of us who come
Right.
from North Carolina because we've seen what a vibrant district it is right now. Can you tell us a little bit about like what happened, about the history, what the city planners undertook, and what could be some lessons for other cities that are struggling with very similar situation?
I can talk about this all day. But basically, as I have tried to look at, what is it? What is the sort of secret sauce? What makes places successful? And really, I was attracted to the University of North Carolina to be able to research this, because this was an area where in the 1950s, North Carolina had a very low per capita income, one of the lowest in the United States. And it really has advanced and done well. And so public policy was really important to building up the universities, also to creating institutions that supported industry and R&D tax credits, right? So sort of government created this field and created capacity. And then there are individual entrepreneurs who move in. And in Durham, a lot of this is driven by the Goodman family. And so, as we have studied these processes, now I've gotten very interested in what are the different kinds of interventions that places can undertake, and then also what is appropriate at different times in an area's development. So many times places jump in and they want to create something like this, and they say, well, we have an old mill, we need an incubator. Well, they have no one who's going to populate that incubator, right? So they spend a lot of money, build an incubator, and then 5 years later, the same few firms are there. And it's an old age home, no longer an incubator. It's another one of my jokes. But, and so, it is the wrong intervention at the right time. And so, really, this is a lot of what we're working on. And the first papers from this are starting to come out. But I'm really, I sort of think like what really makes a difference is having this sort of class of entrepreneurs. They can be, sort of people who start companies. They can also be civic entrepreneurs, but they make investments in a place with a long-run perspective, and then they really just sort of shepherd this process along. And so, this is another reason for creating this database, is that I'm so tired of seeing studies where people do regressions over a cross-section, and they find something different than someone found before them because they're comparing a cross-section at a very, very different stages of their development. And so, they're just not significant relationships, and they don't tell us very much. So I think now with new data, the database that we have built on the Research Triangle, I think we're able to go back to 1957 because we have an event that kind of created this area. And we have about 7,000 firms, and many of them have gone out of existence. And we just bring in different kinds of data sources. We keep building this out, and then trying to, let's not trust any one source, but let's sort of see, what did the newspaper say? What does venture economics say? What does Cap IQ say? And then let's average them. Probably reality is in the middle somewhere. And no one else is going to be able to go back to, sort of 1957. And, we are now trying to think of a template for people to go in now and use a backbone of the NETS data to sort of look at the companies in a place, and then using machine learning to be able to scrape different sources and to create this profile of places that would allow us to study this better. Okay.
Last chance to give Maryann a big applause. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.